Welcome one and all. It's time for a red hot spicy tingling Age of Sigmar tournament report on the day of the event, so it should all be fresh in my mind to be analytically and tactically probed in the usual manner. So, as you can see from the lovely video thumbnail, the Sons of Behemat are back in action, but not just any old Sons of Behemat. This is King Brodd's personal stomp. It's the new Army of Renown from the latest Dawnbringers book. So, a few differences compared to the standard Sons of Behemat. So, in terms of grand strategies, battle tactics, you've got different upgrades for units. So, can play quite differently. The main difference in terms of just fun stuff is the monstrous rampages that you have in the standard Sons of Behemat are not available. The extra cool ones like the monster grapple and all that stuff. Instead, you have one that is really stolen from other factions, which is after you make a charge as a monstrous rampage, you can then do a 3d6 move and kind of fly over enemy units, do damage to them, and then fight maybe something else if you happen to land next to that. So, you've lost a little bit in terms of the number of monstrous rampages, but you do get that very useful one, which is obviously great at getting around screens and so on. The battle tactics are not bad at all. You've got one that involves killing an enemy unit with a piece of thrown terrain, which is a thing that you can do with this army. You can pick up pieces of terrain and just fling them, which is quite straightforward to do. It's on a 2+ to actually throw it, and then it's a random number of attacks. So it's a bit risky to say you are going to try and kill a unit with it for a battle tactic, but it's a cool ability to have. And then the other two battle tactics involve taking objectives that you don't already own, either with King Brodd and another model, or by charging onto an objective and taking it that way. So probably quite easy to do, at least compared to some of the magic ones, which I'm definitely not going to be able to do because I'm not taking any wizards in this list. So I'm going to get onto a little bit of a shot of the start of game 1 here, and I'll tell you what is in my list before I get into the battle plan and all that juicy stuff. So I'm just pulling up my list here now. So King Brodd's Stomp. My grand strategy that I've chosen is Slaughter of Sorcery, so kill all wizards on the battlefield, and I've not taken any, so that's half the job done. I don't have to get any of my units killed to accomplish that. I have then taken the Triumph of Bloodthirsty, so I can reroll a charge. And I think that's quite important because a 500-point model failing its charge, you may well get 2 of those models failing their charge, and with the command point obviously you can only reroll 1 of those, and there are certain ways that the enemy can maybe shut down your use of command points. That seems to be going around quite a lot at the moment, so just useful for doing that. Getting into combat seems quite critical. Then we've got King Brodd, who is over here, as you can see from the gigantic orange arrow. And I've given King Brodd the Big Eater command trait. Now these can be given to unique units in this King Brodd Stomp. So that means that friendly Mega Gargants who are wholly within 12 of him, when they kill models they can get wounds back. So on the occasions that I'm bunching up my Mega Gargants, I can get wounds back on the other 2 via being near King Brodd while they're making kills. Then we've got the Gatebreaker, which is this one here. The Gatebreaker, of course, is the one that can trade in all of its attacks for one 50-50 chance, a 4+, to do 4d6 mortal wounds. So if you're heavily wounded, it's great. If you're against an enemy that's really stacking up their saves very well and you're finding it difficult to get through, very good as well. So we'll see if that comes up. It's a lot of fun as well. Then we've got the Kraken Eater. Oh, by the way, the Gatebreaker has the hand-carved nullstone icon. So despite not being a wizard, he can unbind spells, and if he successfully unbinds one, he can have another go at unbinding a different spell. So we've got a bit of unbinding in the list, because obviously I've not got any casters of my own, so we need some kind of magic defense. Then we've got the Kraken Eater over here, and I've given the Kraken Eater the artifact of power, the Brand of the Gargant King, which means that if he rolls an 8 or higher on a charge roll, then he gets strike first, which again can be quite important for Gargants. Not just making the charge, but then striking with possibly 2 of them first before the enemy goes can be quite a big deal. You don't want them to get knocked down a bracket, for instance. So, this is the first time I've used King Brodd's Stomp, and it's the first time I've obviously used any of these artifacts or any of the command traits and all the various upgrades. So we'll see how they do, and then I've got 3 mini Gargants because those are the models I've got. Ideally, I would like to have a 4th Mega Gargant because all the buffs that you can get in King Brodd's Stomp are generally for the Mega Gargants. I didn't see much in there that benefits the Man Crushers. Some of the other sub-factions are better for the Man Crushers. This one I don't think is, but they're still useful. They have a role. They can go after objectives. They can screen sometimes. So we'll see what they can do. I'm only 1920 points, which means I'm generally going to get my Triumph. And I'm only 3 drops because I've got 4 of my models of the 6 in a battle regiment. So, the first round is Spring the Trap. So, the way that works is that after deployment you can put some of your units off the table and then they can come in later from the side, which people don't often do unless you've got a unit that has some kind of bonus to their charging, which makes it very likely that they'll successfully charge after coming in 9 inches away from the enemy. For example, Scarbrand or something else with 3d6 charge, probably worth it there. Or if you've got anything that's particularly vulnerable to the enemy's army, that it's difficult to hide or keep away from them, maybe you want it off the table. If, for example, Stormcast, where you can put half the army off the table anyway, it allows you to put even more models in reserve. So there are times you would probably want to do it. Other than that, the scoring is standard. You can see the thin strip territory there. So, for my setup, this is in turn 1 here, after I've already made some moves. So I've leapt forward onto all the objectives with my Mega Gargants. I'm up against the Soulblight Gravelords. I'm going to pull up that list right now. Let's see. So, it is the Legion of Blood. And there are several Vengorian Lords. So, there is also Neferata. So, Neferata is... Where is Neferata? Over there somewhere. I think it's that one behind the big tower there. And then 2 Vengorian Lords. And one of them, because there's 3, one of them is Lorca Vi. That's how you pronounce it. And their spells, so that one has Vile Transference, which I think is the one that lets you roll a number of dice equal to the enemy's wounds characteristic to try and do wounds to them. So that's quite a good spell against this army, obviously, because I've got some very high wound units. There is... Neferata has Waste Away, which I think is a debuff. And there are generally just quite a lot of debuffs going on in this army, and that's the kind of thing I want to avoid with the Sons of Behemat, because most armies, if you get a unit debuffed, how many points are being debuffed? If it's Stormcast, the things that are actually on the table for the enemy to target are generally not going to be that expensive, so 200, maybe 300 points a unit to debuff. Sons of Behemat, you're debuffing 500 points if you're going for King Brodd, and that's a significant chunk of the army that is now not very effective. And yeah, most of the Sons of Behemat units are going to be hitting with 3s or 4s on their various attack types. So, yeah, not great. If you get -1 to hit on one of these guys, it's not ideal. So I would like to avoid Bone Reapers, ideally, because they have a lot of that where they just point at you and say, you are -1 to hit. So, I'd like to avoid them, but this is an army that has quite a few debuffs as well. There are also 3 units of Direwolves, and there's a middle unit there, a unit here, and a unit there. So they are slightly divided. You can see there's a gap between the 3 different units. And then there are 2 units of Fellbats, which are hanging out at the back at the moment. Hanging out upside down, probably, like bats do. And yes, there they are. So with a bit of shooting initially, I've launched a piece of terrain immediately and done some wounds onto this Vengorian Lord. So yeah, clearing out a bit of terrain. Is it always optimal to start throwing terrain at the enemy? No, because it means a lot more of those wolves are going to be able to surround my units. If I was playing purely thinking about the scenario here... Oh, by the way, my enemy also destroyed one of the terrain pieces as well, which I think was to stop me throwing it later on. Just destroying it with a monstrous rampage. So this table is looking very bare at this stage. Now, if I don't throw terrain, and I try and use it to like funnel the enemy troops so less of them can fight me, that is a valid strategy. But where is the fun in not picking up a giant crystal or a giant mountain or a building and lobbing it at someone? Where's the fun in not doing that, I would say? So, lobbed some terrain, and for my battle tactic I went for Intimidate the Invaders, which I comically failed. So, this is obviously the first game of the day, and before you're fully in the gaming zone, you can just needlessly overlook things, and my territory is kind of this here. So all I had to do is just move one of these mini gargants, just a little bit, like an extra inch either side, and that would be a battle tactic completed. But because I chose not to, because I just wasn't thinking about it properly, then that's a failed battle tactic, which is a hilarious start. And onto the enemy turn. So my opponent goes for Led into the Maelstrom, charging with hero and a battle line unit, and someone has to be in combat, which is a pretty safe bet because those wolves aren't going to go down too easy. And Waste Away, you can see there, has been put onto my Kraken Eater and its lovely toes. And onto the Gatebreaker. Now the Gatebreaker doesn't really care if you debuff him, because most of the debuffs you can apply to him won't affect his 50-50 chance of doing 4d6 mortal wounds to you, so he is least affected by the debuffs. So ideally I would probably like to get rid of the 3 mini gargants and add another Gatebreaker in there for the heavy debuff armies. So the enemy moving in, sending up all the wolves to try and screen out my Brodd, for instance. Oh, by the way, all these wolves can pile in 6 inches. They don't have to charge you to fight you. And everyone's surrounding the Gatebreaker. They really want to get that thing down. They've obviously perceived that as a really big threat because it's going to ignore their armor saves if I just do the 50-50 attack. Lots of buffs being piled up. I think Flaming Weapon on this one and some other stuff on this one. And after the combat, so another one actually goes in here. All 3 of the Vengorian Lords, but I just whomp one of them to death with the 4+ 4d6 mortal wound attack. So one of them's dead, and they have put 22 wounds so far with their attacks. 27. And the Kraken Eater is being tied up by wolves, but kills some of them. King Brodd is being tied up by wolves, but kills some of them. And you can see there up to 30 wounds, so 5 wounds left on the Gatebreaker. I did make a lot of saves. I've got all-out defense on him, so he's obviously no pushover with that many wounds, but I did make a good number of saves there to keep him alive for the turn. So I've killed one of the enemy dangerous units, and I've still got mine intact. So I'm quite happy with that. Obviously I've got my big Gargants locked in combat, but if I get the turn now, what is going to happen? Well, I will charge my mini Gargants into the wolves, so I'd be fairly confident at killing those 2 wolf units with all the Gargants going into them. And this big guy here, he would hope to kill one more of these Vengorian Lords with his 4+ 4d6 mortal wound attack. Obviously he could miss, but hopefully I could chew through some wolves at the very least. If my opponent goes next, this guy's obviously dead, and then the wolves can continue tying me up, but then I would have a chance for a double after that, so we shall see how it goes. So my opponent scores 3 as well, does score the battle tactic, but does not score for the objectives because I'm holding them all because I've got Gargants on them. And my opponent wins the priority for the next round, unfortunately. So the bats start flying off in anticipation of a later battle tactic, which is the divide and conquer. Is it divide and conquer? It's called something like that, isn't it? Where you have to get to the 3 different table edges with different units. So more damage is being dished out to this guy in combat. I think it may well be... Is it Neferata that only does 1 wound to him? It could well be. But Neferata does kill the mini Gargant there. And you can see I finest houred this guy because I knew he was down to his last few wounds and all-out defense. So my opponent does have monsters that can do monstrous rampages, but fails to roar him, which is why he's able to all-out defense. Down to his last wound once the wolves pile in. So that means King Brodd has now been freed up because these guys decided to come over here instead. And they don't need to charge to do this because they can just retreat from combat and then do their 6-inch pile-in move, which... do we think that's intended when they were writing the rule? That you would be able to retreat from combat and then pile into something else without charging? Maybe, but it's a side effect of the rules, and it's perfectly legitimate. So they've gone into the Gatebreaker there. And on my turn, I'm going to start moving in now for the kill. Oh, by the way, those wolves, the Gatebreaker, I think, oh no, the Kraken Eater either kills them, or maybe some of them get battle shocked away. But I think they're dead now. So both my Mega Gargants on the flanks are free here. So what I would like to do is get them into combat and kill some of these things. That would be nice, wouldn't it? What I want to do really is get the 8+ charge with the Kraken Eater and then strike first with it. And then fight with 2 of my Gargants before the enemy get to strike. So my opponent gets 3 points for that round for getting a battle tactic of, yes, surround and destroy, not divide and conquer. Surround and destroy. So that is scored there with the fell bats going out to the flanks. And in my turn, you can see that I've got my Kraken Eater into combat. I've got King Brodd into combat. Neferata is heavily damaged, but not dead. And the Gatebreaker is dead. King Brodd only does 2 wounds to a Vengorian Lord, which is very disappointing. So what would have been really good, probably, is getting the Kraken Eater in here, leaping over to the other side, ignoring Neferata, getting strike first on this guy, via rolling high enough on the charge, then make the 3d6 move to jump over to the other side, and then attack with both of these, or the Gatebreaker with its 4d6 attacks on Neferata. Attack with this guy first on one of these. If it's still alive, then Brodd can then attack it. It's risky though, because they can get wounds back when they hurt you, because they're vampires. So all in all, it didn't go very well here. Not enough damage is done, and if you don't kill these vampires, they will just heal. So it's not looking great, and taking plenty of damage, taking about half my wounds that turn. I think the Kraken Eater's still okay though. But I'm still scoring points, so I scored 5 points for that round, so I'm in the lead, but I'm not confident at all, because King Brodd has only got 19 wounds left, 1 Gargant down, and the enemy are easily going to heal. And once you've lost the initiative, it's difficult to get it back again, because when you're charging in, that's when you're going to do more of your damage with the impact hits and such. So, who's going to get priority? I think it is the enemy, so I finest our King Brodd, see if that'll keep him alive for the round. And so Neferata uses the spell, the Vile Transference, which just kills King Brodd. He had 19 wounds left, and it does about 21 to him. So he's dead. Wow, wow, wow. So if I'd got the next turn... let's see. Yeah, so if I'd got the next turn, what would have happened in this situation? Well, I could have definitely hit Neferata before she had a chance to heal. So that's the most important thing. And she wouldn't have been able to cast that on King Brodd. I would have still finest houred King Brodd, probably, because he's heavily wounded. He would have survived the round of attacks from one of these vampires. He would have probably had a chance to hit one of them. I'd have been tempted to hit the one that hadn't fought, to try and kill it first, but I would also have been tempted to hit the one that had fought, because it wouldn't be able to heal the wounds back. So that would have been an interesting dilemma had that situation come up, but as it is, the enemy got the priority roll, King Brodd is dead, and it's going to be game over. So it's pretty much just a mopping up operation from now on. My opponent is just spreading out, trying to get objectives off me, but the mini Gargants are worth 10, so you can't take them that easily. let's see. Martini says, is that the giant army for AoS? Yes. There's only one that's actually a GW model. There's one GW Mega Gargant in there, heavily converted. The others are from other manufacturers. So, everyone's now going after the Kraken Eater, who is going to get horribly killed. So I kind of wasted Finest Hour, because it doesn't help you at all against the mortal wounds. Also, another thing I haven't been doing in this game, King Brodd, you're supposed to keep him within 3 inches of a friendly unit, which gives him a 5+ ward save. Martin says, how many giants in the army? Well, you can have 4 of the massive ones as an army, and I've got 3 of the Mega Gargants and 3 of the Mini Gargants as well, 3 of the Man Crushers. So 6 units total, but I would prefer to just have the 4, but I need to get a 4th big giant painted. So, not looking good here, and let's see if they can kill the Kraken Eater in 1 round. 12 wounds there. And Neferata's healed loads of wounds back. So yeah, it's definitely game over. More than half wounds dealt out to the Kraken Eater now. And only 3 points scored though. So in terms of scoring, I'm kind of still in it. But it's not going to help at this stage. So Finest Hour on the Kraken Eater. And then Reprisal. Try and kill the unit that killed my general. Which I'm not going to do. And then my minis are trying to finish off the enemy units. So the enemy grand strategy involves bringing battle line units back to life. So if I don't kill the battle line units, then the grand strategy isn't going to work. So I'm only killing these wolves because these are the ones that were raised from the grave after I killed them. So I don't want to kill the bats, I don't want to kill any of the other wolf units and let them come back for the grand strategy. I'm not going to kill all the enemy wizards though. As you can see, Kraken Eater's dead, so it's definitely game over, if it wasn't already, which it was. So, my opponent's going for Intimidate the Invaders to have more units outside of their own territory than in it. And they're just chasing me down. Going after my mini Gargants with the bats. So what they want to do now is get the bats killed so they can then be brought back to life for the grand strategy purposes. But I failed to kill them, which is good for me. And yeah, I get first crack at round 5, but I'm not really going to score much, if anything. And my opponent can then just rack up a big score at the end. So, there you go. The score at the end looks kind of one-sided, and it definitely trailed that way. Had 1 or 2 priority rolls gone different, it could have been very interesting, but as it was, the Mega Gargants don't dish out a vast amount of damage, unfortunately. And against an army that can debuff them quite handily, and then can regenerate their wounds or bring units back to life, it can be quite tough for the Gargants to get through them. What would I do differently in this game? Let me just go back to earlier in the game, because I did have the 3 Mega Gargants on 3 different objectives earlier on. So this one came over from here. I probably would have been better served keeping my Mega Gargants close together, keeping King Brodd within range of another friendly unit to give him a 5-up ward, and I could, most of my special rules that I chose via the artifacts, not artifacts, what are they even called now? Yeah, artifacts of power and that kind of thing, were reliant on being near to my other units. And that was a bit too spread out, I think. So I saw the 3 objectives and I greedily wanted all of them when I could have just gone for 2. So I could have been defending just this area here, for instance, with my Mega Gargants, so they could all combine their power. So that's something to think about going forward. And into game 2, which is the limited resources. Martin says, are they a fun army to play? Sons of Behemat and Age of Sigmar I find quite fun to play. They're very, very fast because you barely have any units, so the turns are extremely quick. But you also don't have a huge variety of units, so they miss out on a bit of the fun that way. And occasionally you'll meet an army where there's 0 you can do about what they're doing, and occasionally you'll run into an army that can do 0 to you. So you do get the occasional game with them that you know the outcome of as soon as you see the army lists. If the enemy can't do enough damage to kill a Gargant each round, they're going to struggle really badly because it's difficult to take objectives off the Gargants. If there is an enemy army that can beat Gargants to the punch and can outgrind them and come back to life and stack their saves and debuff the Gargants easily and get on the objectives first and be worth a lot, have a lot of bodies, then it can be really an uphill struggle for the Gargants. Anything that can tie them up, because you're tying up a 500-point model, whichever one of the big ones you're going after. So they're all around 500 points. So limited resources. This is the most complicated battle plan. So you've got 6 objectives. If you control one objective for 2 of your turns in a row, that objective switches off and you can't use it ever again. But your opponent can. So double turns are an interesting mechanic in this battle plan, because if you take a double, that means you're almost definitely going to keep an objective twice in a row, which means that it's going to switch off for you and you can't use it again. So you don't want to take all the objectives early. You want to stagger which ones you activate, because your opponent may just want to leave that objective to you so it switches off so you can't use it later. So quite complicated. Now, I've learnt from last time I'm going to keep some Gargants together. We've got King Brodd with a buddy here out on the right flank. We've got the Gatebreaker and the 3 minis over here. And who am I up against? I'm up against the filthy Nighthaunt. So I'm going to pull up that list now and tell you what is in there. Here we go. So it is the Scarlet Doom. And for the leaders, now I'm not even going to pretend to know which is which for most of these, because I have no idea. I've not played against Nighthaunt enough. So there is a Cruelgast Cruciator, who is the general. There is Kurdos Valentian, the Craven King. There's Lady Olinda. Now, Lady Olinda is the one that has all the like swirly... I don't even know if she's on the table at this point. I think she wasn't deployed yet, but she's supposed to be around here somewhere. There are 3 units of 10 Bladegeist Revenants and 1 unit of 20 Grimghast Reapers, which I think those are 2 units of 10. That might be a unit of 20. I'm not 100% sure. And there's a Lord Executioner and a Scriptor Mortis and a Tomb Banshee. So the Tomb Banshee is there. And yeah, I'm not sure which hero is which. This one with all the chains. Who is that? Is that the Scriptor? Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what all these things do. But the deal with the Gravelords, the Nighthaunt should I say, is that they ignore Rend and all their saves are on a 4+. So, 50% of all wounds you inflict are going to be ignored. Whatever happens, regardless of Rend. So for an army that's paying a lot of points to have lots of Rend, it's obviously bad times. So mortal wounds are good. They do have ward saves, but obviously mortal wounds are bypassing their 4+ save that can't be affected by Rend. So it could be one for the Gatebreaker to have a go at trying to kill something. And my opponent is going first, and I gave my opponent the first turn. So, Magical Dominance, which is an easy one, first round, because my Unbinder is outside of 30. But, okay, we're skipping ahead a bit here, because not much happened. The Nighthaunt didn't really do much in the first round. So, what did I manage? The Gatebreaker. Let's see if we've got a wide shot. Got to about here. Because the Mega Gargants can move over the terrain, so in the rules, it's something like if it's 3.5 inches tall or 6 inches tall or something, you can move across it. But for this venue, then Mr. Honest Wargamer Rob decrees that Mega Gargants can just move across any piece of terrain, just to make it easy, because otherwise you'd want bits of terrain that were shorter than this and it just wouldn't look as cool. So he gets to about here, makes a 12-inch charge. That was the only roll required that could actually land. Landed there with 12 inches, and then did the 3d6 extra move after the charge to get over here, because I want to hit Lady Olinda, because it is the spellcaster, which means I would get my grand strategy. So what happened was, I did a bit of damage to her, but then took wounds back from other units striking back at me. But did get right in there. Didn't quite kill her though. And my opponent got 4 points, and I only got 3 for that round, because I chose not to do a battle tactic, because there just wasn't one that I felt confident in doing, so I just picked one of the magic-related battle tactics that was an auto-fail, because I don't have wizards, and I'm saving the good ones for later on. So I just score for objectives. Now, the fact that this charge worked, which was just a long shot, means that I am actually holding 3 objectives now, which is bad, because I wanted to just hold this one and this one. But am I really going to turn down a charge and a chance to kill the enemy's spellcaster immediately? No. It didn't work, didn't quite kill it, but I'm right in there in the enemy army now. And I'm fairly pleased with that because Mega Gargant's pretty survivable, can kind of pin them back there, hopefully, stop them coming out and fighting me. I've got these two close together. And I've thrown this piece of terrain at the enemy because it was fun. No real tactical benefit to doing that because it's going to allow more ghosts to surround me, but throwing terrain is always fun. So, I get the first crack at the next round though, so a bit of a double. So King Brodd has stomped his way over into this unit and killed a fair chunk of them. And the Gatebreaker has taken a load of wounds, but does the 4+ attack, 4d6 mortal wounds on Lady Olinda. And this guy moves over here because I'm doing the surround and destroy battle tactic. So he needs to be on the table edge. Those are the 4+ saves for Lady Olinda. She's got a 4+ ward save. And yeah, not failed very many at all. Oh, by the way, here's a funny story. My opponent spent his entire first game of this event treating those skulls as wands. Even though you can see that the purple dice clearly have wands there, so the skull should actually be the 6. He hadn't used the dice before this event, I think. So, I did say to him during the game that you've got some wands there and some skulls, so the skull must be on the 6. So halfway through this game, he actually realised, or we realised, that he was doing it wrong and that the skull actually represents the 6. Now, the old GW skull dice, the 6 was a 6 and a skull used to be on the 1. So I can definitely see how people would get confused, but they do have some uniformity in their dice now. The symbol is generally always on the 6 now. It used to be that it was always on the 1, and that Forge World put the symbols on the 6s, which was just completely nonsensical. So it makes a lot more sense that all the symbols are on 6s. But people still getting used to it, obviously. So those are all the saved, those ward saves. So she's not dead. I think she got down to 1 wound remaining. If she'd failed 1 more save, which technically should be 2 more, because that one should be a pass as well. So she's alive. Hilariously, and that's bad news for me, because now this guy's surely going to die soon. But because of all that defense and finest hour, he is clinging on for now. I'm going to score 4 points because I got my battle tactic and I'm holding some objectives. Now, 2 of the objectives on the middle here, this one and the one on the right there, I've flipped over my tokens on them because I can now no longer hold them because I've held those objectives for 2 turns in a row. My opponent goes for bait and trap, which is very easy to do because you can retreat from combat with Nighthaunt and then charge in again. So you have to succeed with the charges with different units than the ones that retreated, but you can move units out of combat and then bring them back in again. So it's quite easy to get this one for them. So everyone backs away from the Gatebreaker and then they're all just going to charge in again. So it's the fresh units that have to make the charges successfully to get in there though. And however, an unfortunate moment because the shooting phase happens first and Lady Olinda actually shoots the Gatebreaker to death, which means that the fresh units can't actually charge into it now, so the battle tactic is probably going to be failed. And these guys go after my mini Gargant out on the left with its lovely eyeballs and do some wounds on the charge, I think, and then kill it quite handily. King Brodd is getting into a fight with these revenants. And he gets up to 15 wounds, but he kills a few in return. So my opponent fails the battle tactic, but does kill the Gatebreaker. So only 3 points scored there. So we're currently tied going into the next round. And my opponent gets the double and gets to go next. So as the wide shot here, this objective is now going to switch off for my opponent. This one I think has just been taken now, so that one's still good. So my opponent can still score these 4. I've had these 2 switched off, so I can score these ones. The reason my mini Gargants are hanging back and not going forward is because I can move on to these objectives with them later when I actually need to activate them, because I don't want to activate them all at the start because then they would burn out and I would have nothing left to score at the end. Now, in general, this isn't a mission that's ideal for Mega Gargants, really. because you want to park them on an objective, not die, and stay there for a while. But in this mission, once you're on an objective, it does burn out after 2 goes, so you can't just sit there. So my opponent going into round 3 goes for Led into the Maelstrom, charge in a hero and a battle line unit. Very easy, because they can all retreat and charge. So I make King Brodd an unbinder for this turn, because the magic is quite devastating, potentially. Or just giving buffs and debuffs around. You can see all the buffs and debuffs. When the Nighthaunt charge you as well, they put debuffs on you. So it can be -1 to your save, -1 to hit. Just very scary. So this mini gets charged by this unit there, and he's taken mortal wounds just from the charge, so he'll probably die. King Brodd is heavily surrounded, and the other units are just spreading out a bit. King Brodd is dead. Yeah, so that's not very nice. And however, only 1 point scored, because my opponent is only on 1 objective that can actually be scored, and failed the battle tactic because he killed the Gatebreaker with a shooting attack, and therefore couldn't make a charge. Okay, so into my turn. The Kraken Eater is going to have to do some serious heavy lifting now. So getting into position. And yeah, there's lots of these ghosties left. I've only got 2 models, I think, left now. 1 mini, 1 mega. So I'm just spreading out onto the objectives, getting into combat, trying to kill things, but not fighting too many units at once. And yeah, dealing out some damage onto the ghosties and killing the hero that was hanging out here that was being annoying. Because I think that was the one that had a -1 to hit on it. So it's quite annoying to deal with, but it's dead. And oh yes, we've gone into my opponent's turn now as well. So in my turn, I scored the 5, I think. So a decent score. My opponent only then scores, let's see, how many was it? 2. Because, yeah, intimidate the invaders. Oh no, that's turn 5. Yes, there's a few pictures seemingly missing here. So what happened was, these guys are now spreading out onto the objectives, and they get into the halfway points. They can move out of their territory to get intimidate the invaders later. But really, they're going to score points. It's just a question of whether they can do enough to catch up, because my opponent keeps failing battle tactics, which is helpful for me. So all this unit's killed by the Kraken Eater. And so in turn 5, my opponent only scores... let's see. Yeah, so intimidate the invaders is going to be easy enough. Just get out of your deployment area. So they all start piling out, and then they go after the Kraken Eater, do some damage. This guy ran away from the enemy last turn because my opponent needs to kill my battle line to get a grand strategy, which isn't going to happen. I'm not going to kill the enemy spellcaster, so neither of us are going to get our grand strategy. Now, the situation we are in, I can't score any more points because I can only score this objective, and they are really far away. So, I am currently 1 point behind going into my round 5. The only thing I can do, there is a unit of 4 dudes here. They're the ones that killed King Brodd. So, if I can use Reprisal and kill them, that's going to be 2 points, which is going to put me 1 point in the lead to finish the game with a win. And to set that up, the Kraken Eater, when he was approached by the enemy last turn, I redeployed and went this way towards this unit. So I'm going to be closer to them now, because then if I was stuck in combat, I could still pile in towards them and put my attacks on them with Reprisal. So that was the thought process there. So I'm going to go for Reprisal, and I do manage to kill them. So I'll send the mini in as well, in addition to the Kraken Eater. So even though I've only got 2 models left, that gives me the win by 1 point. So, nice. If we quickly add up the scores here, you can see that I've got 16, and my opponent is sitting on, see, 15. So, yep, the 1 point win for the Sons of Behemat. And even though there's still tons of enemies left, loads of them around here, I'm never going to win a war of attrition. The fact that I just kept slowly and steadily scoring and picking up points, and my opponent had a couple of this particular round that was a disaster. That's really what did it. So even though the last rounds I couldn't pick up many points, I still had just enough in the bank from this scoring session here. And my opponent, yeah, it was just that 1 point turn of failing too many battle tactics that did it for my opponent. I don't think particularly it's a dominant win or anything for the Sons of Behemat. I was really clinging on at the end and had to kind of wrangle it. Overall, it was a close game though, obviously. Into round 3. And this is the Geomantic Pulse. So, from battle round number 2, whoever goes second chooses whether the pulse starts at point A or B. And in all the subsequent rounds, it moves down towards the other side. And you score big points if you're holding the pulse, wherever it happens to be at that time, and also the objectives next to the pulse. You get extra points for those as well. So, what am I up against? I'm going to bring up my opponent's army list now, because it is, if I can even find them on here, there we go, it is the Gloomspite Gits. Now you may see that I've built a little brick of Gargants here, learning from past games, keep them together to get the synergies of King Brodd getting a ward save, and these guys being able to get wounds back when they inflict wounds near King Brodd. There is the enemy castle. We have got Trug, which is this guy here, who is a big, tough troll character. There's a shaman down there, who is one of only 2 wizard units, because there's also these guys here. The, what are they even called? Gobbapalooza. So they're wizards as well, so I have to kill all those wizards for my grand strategy. My opponent has the grand strategy chasing the moon, so if one of the troll characters, I think, is under the effects of the bad moon 3 turns and survives the game, I think that's enough for them to get the grand strategy. By the way, if anyone's watching this and not liking the video, then you're a disgrace. So, what else have we got in this list here? Well, there's some debuffs, which I am not too pleased with, because the Madcap Shaman has the ability to give -1 to save to enemy units within 12. Also has the Itchy Nuisance, which makes an enemy fight last, which is also annoying. Then there are, let's see, that's the Trog boss back there. There's 1 unit of Moon Clan Stabbers, which are these guys, and they also have some Netters in there, which give -1 to hit, which is obviously a nightmare for Gargants. Any kind of debuff is just crippling for them. Then we've got 2 units of Rockgut Troggoths here and here, who, when you look at their attack stats, that for 340 points for a unit that can come back to life at half strength, they, on average, are going to dish out way more damage than a Gargant, I think. So I think they're very, very good. Obviously, they don't have a billion wounds each, but they do have a good accumulation of wounds between 6 of them. Then there are 2 more units. There are the Boingrot Bounders over here, so just a fast cavalry unit, and some Fanatics here, and they block line of sight. So, I'm not going to be able to shoot through them or through terrain. What would be a good strategy in this game? Oh, there's the Bad Moon starting in that corner. So as that moves across, the enemy get buffs from being within the area of the Bad Moon, so really when it's in the centre, that's when they get the most. What would be a good strategy here? I think those Troggoths are very, very tough. Killing them isn't even that useful because they'll come back to life at half strength and they'll do massive damage to a Gargant. So, a smart play would probably be to pounce onto the objectives, hold the important ones, and maybe even hold back in the first turn and not bother going after them too heavily, see where the pulse is going to be, and start diverting forces that way, because my models are worth so much on objectives that I can afford to kind of feed in 1 Mega Gargant, stack up buffs on it, like Finest Hour and All Out Defense, and then limit how many enemies can fight me by staying in things like terrain gaps. Am I going to play anything like that? No, because that means I'm not going to be throwing any terrain, and that's obviously a fun thing to do. It means I'm not going to be throwing everyone into combat, which is obviously not a fun thing to do. And since I already lost one game and it's only a one-day event, I'm definitely not going to finish at the top of the table. So I'm going to make this an action-packed, non-stop, exciting game and get people thrown into combat. See what they can do. So my opponent is going first, or I force my opponent to go first. And Magical Dominance is obviously an easy one because my Unbinder is so far away. And not much happens. So yeah, very little happens in the first turn actually. So, yeah, not much at all. I move up onto the objectives, my opponent moves up a tiny bit, but not much, doesn't want to leave gaps. And yeah, then the pulse is in play. So my opponent chooses to let me go first in round 2, and then puts the pulse on the right hand side. Which means I can fling my Gargants into combat. So I choose, led into the Maelstrom, Battle Line unit, and a hero into combat. Some of them have to be in combat at the end. So I've got my Kraken Eater into the Trolls, who hopefully gets strike first from the charge, and then I can activate him and then another one, and hopefully kill a few of them. But I don't do that much actually. They don't attack very well, unfortunately, the Mega Gargants. They are up against things like Netters that give them -1 to hit, which is just a nightmare. And the Kraken Eater, with all that defense, still takes 12 wounds. So I've cleared out a few, and I've killed quite a lot of the normal goblins, but not much, really. And got my battle tactic, though, so 5 points on the board, and we'll see if I can survive. So I've put Finest Hour on King Brodd, because I assume he's about to get whomped. And I've got this mini here as well, to give him his ward save, for a friendly unit being nearby. He has taken wounds, though. Now, my plan is that because this guy is probably going to die in my opponent's turn, if the enemy move forwards, for example with Trug, into 9-inch range of the Gatebreaker, I'm going to redeploy him and try and get him within 3 of King Brodd to get me my ward save back. That is the plan. And same thing applies over here. If someone were to come, for example, if they were to move out of combat for some reason and I had an opportunity to bring him in, but on this occasion it's very likely to be him if someone comes close enough. So that is what happens. Trug comes too close and I redeploy right next to King Brodd, so I've got some good defense for him now. 5 up ward for a friendly unit, even if this guy dies. Brined Pork Chops is nice Gargants. I should hope they're nice because they took a very long time to build and paint. And the Trog boss goes into King Brodd. The Boingrot Bounders go into the Kraken Eater. And King Brodd is just amassing wounds on him, and he should actually be dead at this point, I think. Or, I'm not sure actually, maybe that's supposed to be a 10. So maybe he's not supposed to be dead yet. I think I've just put the wrong number on the dice. So, the Kraken Eater is dead though. So I would say it's already game over, because I've barely killed any trolls, and I've already lost one of my megas. So I'm going to keep trying to score though. So I do a little bit of killing back, but not too much. My opponent only gets 2 points, so I am in the lead, because I'm going to get 5 for my turn 2. Because, yeah, I'm holding the good objectives, because the pulse was over here with my mini on it. And round 3, the pulse moves down here, and my opponent gets the next crack at it, unfortunately, so he's going to be able to finish off King Brodd, who is dead as a result of magic and shooting, I think. And they can now charge the Gatebreaker with everything and start whomping him to death. So he's almost dead as well already, and there he is, he's dead. So yeah, we're already game over, and I've only had 2 turns. So what can I do to score with just this guy left? Just sit on objectives, try and get some extra points. I can get Intimidate the Invaders, because he just needs to be out of my setup area, which he is. And yeah, after that, everyone's dead. He's going to die any second. There we go, he's dead. And yeah, definitely game over. So really, that's a terribly inefficient and just overall bad way to attack this army. What you want to do really is not engage the Trogs, because they do so much damage. And when I see them rolling with the buffs they have on them, it's coming in with like 20 attacks on 2s and 3s, and I'm thinking, my Stormcast units would love to be throwing dice like that. It does seem it's very easy in this game for certain armies to roll a bucket of dice on 2s and 2s or 2s and 3s, and with lots of rend to back it up as well. The Sons of Behemat are not one of those armies. And because the way that you should be playing them to be successful is way more conservative, I don't think that they're that thematically designed. I think a giant army should be rewarded for stomping through the enemy, getting into combat, eating the enemy, stepping through them as if they kind of aren't there, just walking over them. And I don't feel like the rules particularly reflect that. The monstrous rampage you can do with King Brodd Stomp, where you can fly over the enemy, that's the closest thing they've got to representing that, I think. But in general, they don't have enough damage output to throw them all into combat and expect them to do well. And their armour's not great, they don't get their wounds back very well. They've got one prayer with King Brodd, and you can only do that once per game to get D3 wounds back on everything, but the enemy are usually focus firing onto one Gargant at a time, so it's not going to be that useful. And I think overall the faction could be designed a bit more thematically. I'm not going to go into it too deeply right now. I've also complained about how badly themed the Khorne rules are as well. How you get rewarded sometimes for avoiding fights. Let's see. Pork Chop says basically their book needs to support them more, or they need more support models. I think their rules for the Gargants should just be different. I really like the Gatebreaker's attack, the 4+, and if it does hit, it does 1 billion wounds. I really like that. That is a fun thing that you could imagine a giant actually doing if it was in a fight. It's taking a huge swing that half the time is just going to totally miss as the enemy are leaping out the way of it. And the other half the time, when it does hit, it just obliterates things. So that's kind of how I feel they should be. They should have really big damage, but don't always hit with all their attacks. I think overall they should just do more damage in general. And I don't see why they only have like -2 rend on their massive attacks. They're the biggest things in the entire realms, swinging their weapons, yet they're only -1 or -2 rend on their attacks mostly. They've got some -3, but not that much. Porkchop says just a 5+ splat anything under 30 wounds, but only 1. Then you have a normal kick and slap. Yes, something along those lines. Something where you can just do tons of wounds, but it doesn't always work. I think that would be fun and thematic for a giant. I would also like them to have some kind of a reward for stomping through the enemy that's not just a one-off monstrous rampage that only one thing can do per turn. And yeah, maybe if you just walk through the enemy, they take wounds, unlike the way it is now, which is just with a rampage that happens. And yeah, overall, more damage output, I think. More damage output, more incentive to get more of them into combat at once. Because at the moment, you're encouraged to play them in a kind of a negative way that these big, aggressive, angry giants shouldn't be playing that way within the theme of the army, I think. Anyway, so there's my mini rant on the design of the Sons of Behemat. And how do I feel about this list? I don't think I played it that well. But I do think there is potential. I think I would like to ditch the 3 mini Gargants and get 1 more big Gargant. I do have the model I'm going to use for it already. I just haven't even started assembling it yet. Maybe I'll get inspired to do that now after playing these games, because I can then run 4. I could get rid of the 3 little ones and bring in another Gatebreaker, because he proved to be my most successful damage unit at getting through some of the high save units. So another one of those could be good. Another Kraken Eater perhaps as well, because he's got the ability to kick objectives, which I didn't really get to do in this game. Because obviously, if you've only got 1 model that can do that, the chances of it coming up aren't that high. If you've got 2 of them, maybe you can get more chance to kick the objectives. I like the good damage output you can get from throwing the terrain, but because you're a small number of huge models and the enemy are usually more numerous, the terrain actually works in your favour a lot of the time because it limits how many of them can get into combat with you. So it kind of goes against playing the army efficiently, I think, that rule. Flinging the terrain and then it disappearing. So, it's interesting. They're generally fun to play, but I think I would make some tweaks. I don't think I really got much value out of the upgrades I chose for my list. I didn't really get to get any wounds back from eating enemy models particularly. And the Strike First ability on the 8+ charge roll for the Kraken Eater, I think I got that off once at the entire event. So I'm not 100% sure on keeping that. Let me just pull up my list and see if I've got any other thoughts on any of it. So the Nullstone icon, I don't feel like I got enough value out of that either. I unbound a spell or two, but I would have much preferred to just have a spellcaster with a Mystic Shield. I think that would have made a big difference at keeping the Gargants alive, especially if you're playing them optimally, where if you're stacking up all the buffs onto one Mega Gargant and that's the one that's doing the fighting, and the others are waiting back for that one to die so they can take its place, constantly fighting over the objective with massive number of bodies that they count as. So I think that's the more efficient way to play them. So I think Mystic Shield is quite useful for that. Other than that, fun games, some nice armies to play against. Because the armies weren't laid out at lunchtime, because it was judged by an expert painter rather than by the masses, so we didn't vote for each other's armies for best painted, but there was a very nicely painted Seraphon army that won the coolest army award. So I didn't see it, so I don't have any pictures of it. I didn't see it in action because I didn't play against it. And let's see, oh yeah, the Gits player here is the one that won the favourite opponent award. And this was a cool game. Got to throw Gargants in, throw some dice, kill some things. Didn't kill enough, obviously. I didn't play it in the most strategic way, though. And overall, I want another Mega Gargants. That's my takeaway from this. The Mini Gargants tend to underwhelm, I think. They don't survive particularly well. And even just for taking objectives, I don't really like them at the moment. Especially running King Brodd Stomp, because they don't get a lot of value out of it. You get more value from the Mega Gargants in this sub-faction. So I'll get another one done. As for other factions, Stormcast, obviously I've got loads of them. I'll be doing more events with them later. I've got a couple of units to paint for them as well. Other upcoming events, I am running a Dead Zone tournament at the TSN Arena next weekend. So any Dead Zone players out there who want to be in Nottingham next week to play Dead Zone, let me know. And I can get you in with a late ticket. And then, looking at my tournament calendar here, because I just bought a load of tickets for the upcoming year. At the end of January, we've got the Kings of War Masters, which I've qualified for via being the highest ranked Abyssal Dwarf player. So I have to use Abyssal Dwarves at that event as part of my qualification criteria. Then we've got an Age of Sigmar event in early February. And then there's a little gap, and mid-March I've got another Age of Sigmar event. Then in early April it's an Old World event. So Warhammer the Old World will be out by then, and I can definitely use my dwarves. I just need to get some base extenders for them so that they are the new base size, so I don't have to rip them off their bases. Then after that, I've got another Kings of War event, also in early to mid-April. And then after that, there's a bit of a gap, and a couple more Kings of War events for later in the year at the moment. So always keeping my eye out on the various tournament calendars. The calendar for the TSN Arena is the main one, because that's very close by, and anything at Warhammer World is very close by as well. So I'm constantly, every week or so, refreshing those pages to see if any new tournaments have popped up that I can sign up for. In the meantime, I'm also looking out for Dead Zone, Kings of War, Age of Sigmar, Old World, and any other game systems. Dreadball, I'd be interested in events for that. Don't see too many of those going on. Okay, so that's what's coming up. There'll be more videos, obviously. Don't forget, if you haven't liked the video, to do that. Also, if you want me to keep continuing to bring you the delightful breakdowns of all my games, the tactical analysis of various game systems, so that you can, in the case of this tournament, you can learn what not to do to succeed with the Sons of Behemat. But in general, in-depth tactical insight. I'll attend loads of tournaments and then break them all down so that you can learn how to beat me specifically, and maybe also pick up some tips for beating other people, then why not go and pledge your entire life savings to me via Patreon or PayPal in the video description? Why not indeed? What better use for your entire life savings than to keep this beacon, this lighthouse in the sea of hobby mediocrity, the lighthouse that guides you towards the shores of tactical mastery? How about that? Other than that, don't forget to check out all the social media shenanigans down there as well. There's a Facebook group, Discord server, and one last thing, the Andy and Rem show. We're hoping to get a couple of live shows in soon because Mr. Rem is actually not on tour at the moment. So he should be available to do some shows soon. Hopefully we'll get a game in as well. I'm going to try and get him to some events, but that is tricky with the old unreliable Remster. Let's see, Mr. We've got Brined Porkchop says, if I bequeath you my life savings, you're going to be owing a few thousand to the American government. Well, that would have to be a significant amount then, which I would gladly accept, and then I'll negotiate with the government later. Okay, time to wrap this one up. Any final thoughts? If not, then I believe it is time to say these immortal words. Good night out there, whatever you are.